What if love weren't a refuge, but a battlefield? What if behind gestures of tenderness there existed a silent struggle for power, influence, and survival? For Nietzsche, nothing in humans is innocent. Even the sweetest kiss can hide a dispute, a calculation, or a desire for domination. The philosopher saw love not as a union of souls, but as a vital strategy, where each sex seeks to impose its force, seduce, manipulate, and win. The war between the sexes is not open, but secret, fought in glances, in expectations, in games of desire, and in promises of eternity that are never fulfilled. By understanding it, we don't become more cynical, but more lucid. The question is, are you prepared to look at love without the masks of romantic illusion? If so, move forward, because here we won't speak of fairy tales, but of invisible battles that shape every relationship. If this type of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey. Nietzsche never believed in love as a pure or altruistic feeling. For him, love was just another face of the will to power, that vital force that moves every human being in their search for affirmation and dominance. When a man courts a woman, or when a woman seduces a man, behind the enchantment there is always a conquest strategy, an attempt to secure position, guarantee survival, or exercise influence over the other. It's as if every gesture of affection were, ultimately, a movement within a silent battle. Think of an everyday scene, a couple sitting at a restaurant table. The man tries to impress by talking about his professional achievements, displays his intelligence, his strength, his social value. The woman observes him, sometimes admiring, sometimes testing, carefully choosing her words and expressions, letting small signs of interest or disinterest escape. What seems like just a light conversation about life, for Nietzsche, is a duel. A game of exhibition and evaluation where each measures the strength of the other. Love, in this sense, would not be the harmonious fusion of two souls, but the clash of two worlds of power that intertwine. Nietzsche saw in this game something inevitable, almost biological. Love is not rational. It's born from instinct, from the necessity of perpetuating life, from the desire to impose oneself over another being. When someone says, "I love you," there's an ambiguous truth there. At the same time, a desire for union and a desire for possession. Love always carries a shadow of selfishness, because to love is also to want the other, to become an extension of oneself, to confirm our existence and submit to our gravitational field. This aspect of power also reveals itself in small daily concessions. When a partner gives in during an argument, it's not always about generosity or selfless love. Often, it's about a maneuver, a strategic retreat to win later, or a gesture of control masked under the appearance of kindness. Nietzsche reminds us that there is no neutrality in love. There are always intentions, games, hidden struggles. And it's precisely because of this characteristic that love becomes so fascinating. It is at the same time war and beauty, conflict and poetry. The passionate gaze can be so seductive because it carries within itself a promise of victory, the promise of having conquered the other, of having defeated them in the invisible field of seduction. The tenderness that soothes can also be the sweet poison that traps. Care and attention can be weapons even more effective than explicit aggression. Love doesn't need swords. A well-calculated silence, a compliment at the right moment, or even the sudden withdrawal of attention is enough to destabilize the other. Nietzsche saw in this a danger, the danger of believing in the purity of love. He affirmed that believing in eternal and altruistic loves was falling into illusion, into the romantic fantasy that culture, religion, and literature had fed for centuries. For him, love is interest, it's force, it's instinct. This doesn't make it lesser, but reveals it in its true nature. And understanding this nature is liberating because it allows us to see beyond the masks. If we observe human history itself, we perceive how this secret war shaped cultures, alliances, families, and even empires. How many kings were manipulated by their mistresses? How many powerful men lost everything for a passion? How many women were sacrificed by the logic of masculine possession? Love, far from being just an individual feeling, also became a field of collective power, influencing entire social structures. However, Nietzsche doesn't invite us to reject love, but to face it without naivety. To love for him is not an error. The error is in believing that love is something beyond the game of life, beyond the silent dispute that we are. Love is vital force, its war camouflaged as tenderness, and can only be lived fully when we recognize this truth. Those who continue believing in the angelic purity of love become easy prey, because they enter battle without realizing they're already being attacked. Thus, when looking at our own relationships, perhaps we should ask ourselves, to what extent is what we call love, in truth, desire for possession? To what extent do our sweetest declarations not also hide a silent cry for power? What do we really seek when we say we love someone? The answer may be uncomfortable, but Nietzsche reminds us, lucidity always hurts before it liberates. Nietzsche saw women not as fragile or passive beings, but as natural strategists of life. While patriarchal culture insisted on portraying them as dependent, obedient, and submissive, the philosopher saw exactly the opposite. An instinctive, subtle, and powerful intelligence, capable of operating in the terrain of seduction with a skill that men rarely achieve. For him, women didn't need brute force to win, because they already possessed the most refined of weapons, the art of enchanting, manipulating, leading without being perceived. In the secret war between the sexes, women act like those who master a silent game. Their battlefield is not that of direct imposition, but of suggestion. A look can be sharper than a sword. A calculated gesture can be worth more than a speech. Nietzsche suggested that while men believe they are the conquerors, often they are the ones being conquered, involved in the invisible web that women weave around them. It's not just about physical seduction, but a psychological and emotional network that traps, molds, and directs. For Nietzsche, this ability wasn't the fruit of conscious malice, but of a deep instinct linked to survival. For centuries, in contexts where women had less access to formal power, they learned to move behind the scenes, to exercise influence indirectly. This social weakness transformed into strategic strength. Where men used swords, women used silence. Where men imposed by force, women insinuated through charm. This cunning, this ability to use appearance, emotion, and desire as instruments was part of their natural genius. Nietzsche also saw in feminine beauty a kind of vital mask. Not in the superficial sense of mere vanity, but as a power resource. Beauty is not just aesthetic, it is language, symbol, energy that directs gazes and subjugates wills. How many wars were fought? How many men were lost? How many empires fell because a feminine glance altered the course of history? The philosopher knew that beauty is more than appearance. It's a political force, a mechanism of natural selection, a silent weapon that redefines destinies. A simple example can make this clear. Imagine a work environment where men and women compete for recognition. Men often strive to display results, raise their voices, assert their presence. Women, on the other hand, may influence through tone, through smile, through the way they create subtle alliances and awaken sympathies. While he believes he's winning through the force of his words, she has already planted invisible seeds that will decide the outcome in the long term. For Nietzsche, this type of practical intelligence is proof that women were never weak. They just played on another chessboard. It's necessary to understand that for Nietzsche, this vision is not a depreciative criticism, but a statement. He didn't exalt feminine cunning as morally good, nor condemn it as bad. He saw it as vital expression, as part of nature in action. Women are strategists because life demands this of them, because their survival always depended on the capacity to influence, protect themselves, and create bonds that guaranteed continuity. Seduction, then, is not futile vanity, but vital force, art of living. This aspect also reveals something disturbing. Women, when seducing, never give everything of themselves. They always keep a part secret, a reserve of mystery that maintains the other in constant search. Nietzsche understood this as fundamental in the dynamics of the war of the sexes. Women don't offer themselves completely because, by maintaining distance and enigma, they conserve power. Those who believe they have conquered completely are already, in truth, entangled in the greatest of illusions. This explains why so often men feel a kind of impotence before women. Even when they believe they dominate, there's always something that escapes. A remainder of power they don't reach. This sensation of incompleteness is not by chance, it's strategy. It's what keeps the game alive, what preserves tension and consequently, desire. Nietzsche saw in this movement an inevitable circle. Women don't destroy men, but keep them prisoner in an interminable search, thus sustaining the eternal dance between the sexes. By recognizing this role, Nietzsche doesn't invite us to distrust women, but to understand the depth of this game. There's no possible naivety here. Women act as strategists because that's how they're molded by life. They don't need physical force to win. Their weapon is invisible intelligence, the art of enchanting and manipulating without the other perceiving. In this sense, they are the great generals of the secret war between the sexes, conducting silent battles that shape relationships, destinies, and even entire civilizations. And perhaps the question that remains at the end is, to what extent do men really choose, and to what extent are they chosen? To what extent is the desire they believe they command already previously guided by a feminine strategy? If women are the strategists of seduction, men are the actors who believe they're at the center of the stage, without realizing that they're often guided by invisible forces. Nietzsche saw in men a dangerous vanity, the illusion that they dominate the amorous game, that they conquer through force, position, or intelligence. This excessive confidence is nothing but a trap, because men rarely perceive that their supposed victory was already foreseen in the plot of the woman they believed they dominated. In the secret war between the sexes, men usually enter with open chest, display their courage, flaunt their conquests, desire to be seen as masters of the situation. Since the beginning of history, this role has been culturally reinforced. Men as hunters, conquerors, warriors, but Nietzsche shows us that often this pride transforms into blindness. While they believe they're hunting, in reality, they're the ones being attracted to the net. Masculine desire, more direct and explosive, becomes vulnerable before feminine patience, which acts in more subtle layers. A simple example can illustrate this paradox. Think of a man who believes he has seduced a woman at a party. He feels like master of the situation, certain that his conversation, his posture, and his charm were decisive. However, he rarely realizes that the woman had already chosen before even the first dialogue. The look, the position in space, the discreet smile, all of this was the true seduction scene, long before he believed he was conquering. The illusion of masculine dominance, therefore, is not victory, but blindness before the invisible power that was already in action. Nietzsche saw in this a tragic irony. Men who take pride in their amorous conquests are actually frequently manipulated by their own need for affirmation. They need to feel like conquerors to feed their identity. They need to believe they dominated, that they took possession, that they won. This pride is their most vulnerable point because it makes them manipulable. Women who understand this don't need excessive effort. They just need to touch masculine pride, reinforce their vanity, let them believe they're in control. Thus, They surrender completely without realizing they no longer have a choice. The philosopher also connected this masculine illusion to a deeper aspect, the instinct for power as self-affirmation. Men seek to dominate because they fear the sensation of impotence. When they believe they've conquered, they feel stronger, more secure, more vital. But this sensation is temporary and often illusory. Real dominance, that which lasts, is not in their hands, but in the silent strategy of women who made them believe in their victory. That's why Nietzsche said that men rarely love without wanting to possess, and it's exactly this yearning for possession that weakens them. This mechanism also appears in long-term relationships. Husbands who believe they govern the home, make the big decisions, impose their authority, frequently ignore the invisible influence that directs their steps. The choice of words, gestures of affection or refusal, the administration of silence, all of this can conduct men without them realizing it. Their authority is visible, but their dominance is fragile because it depends on the sustenance of women who, by instinct or calculation, know where to yield and where to resist. Thus, men reign only on the surface, while real power circulates in other layers. Nietzsche doesn't expose this vision to humiliate men, but to unmask the illusion that weakens them. By believing themselves absolute conquerors, they become prisoners of their own vanity. True strength, according to Nietzsche, would be in recognizing the game, in admitting that there is no total dominance, that every amorous relationship is a field of tension and not a definitive victory. Only when men abandon their fantasy of absolute control can they begin to love with lucidity without being deceived by their own need to feel superior. This reflection leads us to an uncomfortable question. How many times do men really choose, and how many times do they merely respond to the invisible call of women? How many of their conquests were, in truth, disguised choices that gave them the sensation of power? The secret war between the sexes is sustained in this paradox. Men believe they dominate, but it's precisely this belief that makes them more vulnerable. Recognizing this doesn't diminish their strength, but frees them from the illusion that imprisons them. For Nietzsche, love could never be reduced to a simple romantic feeling or an elevated spiritual experience. Behind every passion, every gesture of tenderness and each promise of eternity, there's something deeper, instinct. And instinct doesn't seek happiness, but survival. Love in its essence is a vital force that guarantees the continuity of life, even if for this it needs to disguise itself in sweet words, oaths of loyalty, and dreams of union. When two beings are attracted, it's not just individual desire, it's life seeking to perpetuate itself through them. Nietzsche distrusted idealized interpretations of love, those that speak of soulmates or purely spiritual unions. For him, love was always an expression of the will to power, and this will is nothing more than life trying to expand itself, strengthen itself, conquer more space. To love, therefore, is a form of fighting for survival, not of an isolated individual, but of a lineage, of a continuity that surpasses conscious will. Instinct in this game is stronger than any rational intention. Think about how desire arises. Sudden, overwhelming, almost uncontrollable. It doesn't ask permission from reason. How many times does someone fall in love with whom they shouldn't, or insist on maintaining a relationship even knowing the risks and pains? This happens because love, in its deepest layer, is not conscious decision, but obedience to life's call. Instinct chooses before the mind perceives. Logic comes later, trying to justify what has already been decided in existences underground. Nietzsche saw in this a fascinating ambiguity. On one side, Love seems to elevate us, give meaning to life, offer moments of ecstasy and plenitude. On the other, it binds us to power games, makes us hostages of impulses we don't control, leads us to situations that can destroy as much as strengthen. This duplicity is part of its vital nature. Love is life in expansion, but life also feeds on pain, conflict, sacrifice. To love is, therefore, to enter a field where pleasure and suffering walk together. If we observe animals, the logic becomes even clearer. Peacocks display their exuberant plumage not out of innocent vanity, but to attract females and guarantee offspring. Lions fight against other males to secure their territory, and with it, the right to mate. Females, in turn, select carefully, protecting their young and ensuring that only the strongest survive. All this dynamic is, ultimately, survival disguised as courtship, struggle, exhibition. Nietzsche believed that human beings don't escape this law. They just dress it up with poetic words and social ceremonies. A candlelit dinner, for example, may seem like a gesture of selfless love. But at its root, what's at stake is the attempt to attract, conquer, strengthen bonds that ensure continuity. Instinct uses the language of romance as a mask. Alliances, promises of fidelity, families that form, all of this, seen by Nietzsche, is part of a vital machinery much larger than individual will. What we call love is in large part life ensuring its own persistence. This view may seem cold, almost cruel, but for Nietzsche it's liberating, because by understanding that love is instinct, we also realize that it doesn't need to be idealized to be lived. On the contrary, the more we distance ourselves from the illusion of purity, the more we can deal with love as it is: vital force, power game, survival instinct. This doesn't make it lesser, it makes it real. And the real, even harsh, always strengthens more than illusion. Nietzsche said that great human errors arise when we try to deny or hide instincts. Christian morality, for example, tried to domesticate love, reduce sexuality to sin, and transform passion into something controlled by duty. But instincts don't disappear. They just hide, waiting for the moment to explode. To love is to recognize this underground movement and live with it consciously, without pretending we're angels devoid of desire. Those who deny instinct become slaves to it. Those who accept it learn to dance with it. In this sense, love reveals itself as one of the clearest scenarios of the struggle between nature and culture, between instinct and morality. We love because we're impelled to do so, because life pushes us toward this dance of attraction and power. But we suffer when we try to fit this impulse into narrow molds, into ideals of purity and eternity that don't correspond to reality. Wisdom, for Nietzsche, is not in fleeing from love, but in crossing through it with open eyes, accepting its indissoluble connection with survival. And here arises an inevitable question. If all love is, ultimately, life instinct, to what extent are our choices really free? When we believe we're deciding for ourselves, aren't we just obeying invisible commands from nature? Perhaps the greatest challenge is not escaping this instinct, but learning to recognize it and transform it into strength, instead of letting ourselves be enslaved by it. Nietzsche saw love as a vital war, full of strategies, instincts and disguises. But what happens when this war, which should be movement, game and creative tension, transforms into prison? It's at this point that the philosopher casts his critical gaze on romanticism, marriage and the idealization of relationships. Love, which could be lived as intensity and flow, often converts into an existential jail in which one imprisons the other in promises of eternity that life can never fulfill. Romantic culture built a powerful illusion that to love is to complete oneself in the other, merge into a stable and perfect unity. This vision, according to Nietzsche, is a sweet poison, because it suffocates life's dynamic character and transforms love into something heavy, loaded with impossible expectations. Those who believe in this myth enter a relationship seeking absolute security, as if the other had the duty to fill all the gaps in their existence. The result is inevitable: frustration, resentment, and guilt. What was supposed to be dance becomes shackle. Nietzsche didn't see marriage as a necessarily condemnable institution, but criticized it when it became merely the formalization of this prison. Marriage, by demanding promises of eternal fidelity, tries to fix what by nature is mutable. Love lives from movement, tension, creative imbalance. When one tries to transform it into perpetual stability, it dies, suffocated. And yet millions enter this machinery believing they'll find security in it. What they find often is boredom, hidden betrayal, or coexistence marked by small wars disguised as routine. An example helps make this clear. Think of a couple that, after some years together, stops being enchanted with the small seductions of the beginning. There's no longer the game of conquest, but the weight of obligations. Women may feel that their power of enchantment has been reduced to the role of caregiver or correct wife. Men, in turn, may feel that their vanity as conquerors dissolves in the repetition of daily life. Both, without realizing, no longer live love as movement, but as duty. The vital instinct, which should be a source of energy, was imprisoned by social conventions. This is the prison Nietzsche warns us about. For the philosopher, the greatest trap is in the belief that the other exists to complete us. This expectation destroys any relationship because it transforms the partner into a slave of our deficiencies. We want the other to be at the same time lover, friend, confidant, protector, mirror. We want them to cure our pains and fill our voids. But no relationship can carry this weight without being corrupted. Life doesn't support completeness. It flourishes in imbalance, difference, clash. Demanding from love what only life itself can offer is transforming it into prison. Nietzsche saw in resentment one of the most dangerous poisons in this scenario. When we feel the other doesn't correspond to our expectations, we start blaming them for our unhappiness. Love, which was born as fascination, degenerates into accusation. Resentment corrodes the relationship because it transforms vital war into petty war, where there's no longer creation, but only mutual destruction. The couple no longer lives the power game as stimulating tension, but as suffocating weight. The prison is already closed. This criticism from Nietzsche is not an invitation to cynicism, nor to rejection of love. It's a call to lucidity. To love is not to make promises of eternity, but to accept transitoriness, unpredictability, and even the cruelty that love carries. When we try to imprison it in fixed molds, it escapes us. When we accept its fluid nature, it becomes a source of strength. Prison is born from fear, fear of solitude, fear of loss, fear of instability. But life is made exactly of instability, and love cannot escape this law. Thus Nietzsche provokes us to look at our own relationships and ask, are we living love as movement or as prison? Aren't our expectations transforming the other into jailer or prisoner? To love lucidly means abandoning the romantic ideal and accepting that love is always risk, game, and intensity, never absolute security. And it's precisely this instability that makes it alive. In the end, prison is not in love itself, but in the way we choose to idealize it. When we try to transform it into certainty, it converts into cage. When we accept that it's struggle and impermanence, it becomes a path of vitality. The question Nietzsche leaves us is, do we prefer the dead security of prison or the living risk of the secret war between the sexes? Nietzsche didn't write about love to destroy it, but to purify it of its illusions. His cutting gaze sought to liberate, not imprison. After understanding love as war, instinct and disguise of power, the great question arises: is it possible to live love without being enslaved by it? Nietzsche's answer is not in abandoning love, but in crossing through it with lucidity, in surpassing it as romantic illusion and transforming it into vital force. The first task is abandoning the belief in completeness. The other is not there to save us or to fill our lacks. This myth, so rooted in culture, is precisely what generates suffering. When we expect love to resolve our pains, we inevitably become disappointed. Nietzsche invites us to invert the logic. Instead of seeking in the other what we lack, we should become more whole beings, stronger, more affirmative. Only thus can we love without transforming love into prison. Lucid love is born from abundance, not from deficiency. Another essential point is recognizing war as an inevitable part of the amorous game. There's no way to eliminate tensions, disputes, power games. Trying to deny them is falling into naivety, but when we accept that the relationship is also a field of forces, we can learn to play without resentment. The secret is not in fleeing from dispute, but in transforming it into something creative, into energy that strengthens both. Conflict doesn't need to be destructive. It can be what keeps the flame alive, what prevents stagnation and routine. To love in this sense is also to fight, but to fight consciously, without illusions of eternal harmony. Nietzsche believed that life is only justified as aesthetic experience. This means we should live not in search of fixed truths or absolute guarantees, but of intensity, beauty, creation. The same applies to love. Instead of demanding security from it, we can transform it into art, the art of seduction, of the game, of presence, of the instant. Living love as aesthetics is accepting it in its transitoriness, savoring it without obsession for eternity. The true Nietzschean lover doesn't say, "You will be mine forever," but rather, "May this instant be so full that I desire it infinitely." Overcoming romantic illusion requires courage because it means giving up comfortable dreams. It's easier to believe in fairy tales than to face life's harshness. But Nietzsche reminds us that comfort is the enemy of vitality. Love lived without masks can be more intense, more dangerous, but also more truthful. It requires full presence from us, attention to the instant, strength to deal with impermanence. It's not about pessimistic love, but about affirmative love, capable of embracing both joy and pain. An everyday example can illustrate this vision. Imagine a couple that, instead of living from promises of future, decides to live the present with maximum intensity. They don't worry about ensuring eternity, but about making each encounter a creative happening. They may argue, they may challenge each other, they may even separate. But while they're together, they live fully, without demanding from the other what life cannot guarantee. This love is not prison, but aesthetic experience. It's dangerous, yes, because it doesn't promise security. But precisely because of this, it's more authentic. Nietzsche also alerts us against the moralization of love. When we try to impose fixed rules, rigid roles, and moral obligations, we kill the spontaneity of instinct. Love becomes a social contract and no longer a vital force. Overcoming romantic illusion also means liberating love from morality, accepting it as it is. Imperfect, contradictory, full of games and tensions. Only thus can we live without resentment, without demanding from the other what they cannot give. In the end, Nietzsche's proposal is not to reject love, but to affirm life through it. To love in a Nietzschean way is to love without illusions, without masks, without comfortable lies. It's recognizing that all love is struggle, instinct, and power, and still choosing to live it with aesthetic intensity. Overcoming romantic illusion doesn't kill love. On the contrary, it makes it stronger, freer, more truthful. because only those who abandon unreal dreams can live the real with depth. And then, the question remains that Nietzsche would leave us. Are you willing to love without illusions? Are you ready to abandon the promise of security and dive into the living risk of the secret war between the sexes? This is the courage necessary to transform love from prison into potency, from comfortable lie into vital truth. We've reached the end of this journey through the secret war between the sexes, through Nietzsche's gaze. Throughout the chapters, we've seen that love is not purity, but power, not harmony, but tension, not stability, but vital flow. We discovered how women, strategists of seduction, conduct with cunning the invisible game, while men, trapped in their vanity, believe they dominate when in truth they're already ensnared. We realize that love is instinct that seeks to perpetuate life, and that when transformed into romantic prison, degenerates into resentment and frustration. And finally, we learned that overcoming love's illusions doesn't mean abandoning it, but living it with more lucidity, intensity, and strength. Nietzsche taught us that life is only justified as aesthetic experience. This also applies to love. Living not from eternal promises, but from the intensity of the instant, not from comfortable illusions, but from the courage to face the real. Lucid love is not prison, it's potency. And now I ask you, what was the illusion about love that most imprisoned you until today? Leave your answer in the comments and also tell us where you're watching from. If this reflection touched your mind and heart, like this video and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring philosophy's depths. Thank you for being part of this community that seeks to think about life without masks, with courage and lucidity.